Okay. And we're live.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on nanofabricating optomechanics. As always, please turn your camera off and keep following the house rules. If you have any question during the chat, then please put them into the Zoom chat or in the YouTube chat where you are watching from, and we will pass them to the panelists at the end of the session. And without any delay, I would like to introduce today's chair, Dr. Sergey Kavanaugh. He did his PhD on the topic of noise properties of single electron transistor in 2008 from Sweden. And after that, he had worked in a research laboratory in Japan. And then he also worked as a research fellow at the University of New South Wales, Australia. And finally, he came to Lancaster, where he is a senior lecturer at Lancaster University in low temperature group. So please, Sergey, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Saba. And I will introduce our panel members today. I will choose alphabetic order. And the first speaker will be Pavel Ginsburg. He's the head of the Laboratory of Dynamics of Nanostructures from Tel Aviv University. And he studied in Israel, in the Technikon. After that, he spent quite a long time in the King's College of London and settled down back in the Tel Aviv University. So, Pavel, can you talk briefly about your current research, please?
Hello, hello everyone. So my lab does quite a few things which are spanned between radio engineering and optomechanics. So the focus of this section is optomechanics. And what we do with optomechanics, our general project is to do targeted drug delivery with the help of optical tweezers. So what happens, we catch individual cells, we catch individual drugs, and we can optomechanically manipulate between them. And see what happens, not on the statistical level, which is typically done in the field, but on the single cell and single drug level. So we can study those interactions with the aid of optomechanical tools.
Okay, thank you. Our second speaker will be John Lowell, and he has very long history in science. His bachelor was from the Stanford University, US. He did PhD on the Harvard University, postdoc in France, in the École Supérieure Normale, and in the Paris. And finally, after many years, he settled down in the NIST, where he's working now. And John, can you introduce your current research, please?
Sure, thank you. First of all, I'm perhaps a little bit the exception here. I'm really more of an atomic physicist. I'm not a fab guy. I started out doing atom optics, laser cooling, and at NIST, high accuracy fabric-pyrometrology with frequency combs. But more recently, I got involved in some optomechanics as we had some reorganizations at NIST, starting with studying the optomechanical properties of indium arsenide quantum dots driven by surface acoustic waves, and then moved on to radiation pressure optomechanics, mostly using photonic crystals in silicon nitride. And more recently, we are integrating them with phononic crystals, trying to make hybrid devices. And my thing I'm really most excited about these days is also incorporating them into active cavity devices. So bringing active cavities into the optomechanical domain. And I guess I'd finally just close saying that I'm now in a group that's really a photonics group. So I'm surrounded by, well, I'm the lone atomic physicist. I'm in this environment of people who do metasurfaces, photonics, and MEMS.
Okay, thank you very much. After that, I would like to introduce Guilhem Madiot. He's probably the youngest colleague, and he was studied and graduated from the Paris University, and currently he's doing his science in the Catalan Institute of Nanoscience and Technology. Guilhem, can you introduce your current research?
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really surrounded by impressive CVs. So yeah, as you said, I did my PhD on optomechanics and electromechanics in Paris-Saclay. I was working on the collective dynamics of these oscillators coupled to each other by two optomechanical oscillators, two electromechanical oscillators, in order to study the collective dynamics, the nonlinear dynamics of these systems. I was using photonic crystals and involved in the fabrication of these devices. And so now I didn't change so much the science I'm doing. I'm still working a bit on optomechanics, but the main line of what we are doing in Barcelona here is the study of phononic structures, and we try to implement launching, propagation, and detection of phonons at the nanoscale, with the challenges being working at high frequency, over a gigahertz, and if possible over 10 gigahertz, and to use silicon. And so we are working on topological interfaces to propagate phonons by reducing as much as we can the scattering processes. And I'm also involved in optomechanical techniques to launch phonons in those waveguides. So yeah. Okay,
thank you very much. The next speaker will be Pavel Seidler, and it's absolutely fantastic speaker. He's from the IBM Research Zurich, and according to my knowledge, he's an expert in chemistry. And actually, it's very nice to have his opinion on the optomechanics as well. He was graduated bachelor degree in the California University in Caltech. After that, he did a PhD in the Berkeley, and he has a very long history on the IBM and also in some industries like Exxon corporations. Paul, can you talk about your current research?
Yes, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this interesting discussion. I'm in the quantum technology area at IBM. Quantum computing is a major research and development direction for IBM. I'm in a group called Quantum Transduction and Photonics right now. And the primary focus of my research is on developing a quantum coherent microwave to optical bidirectional transducer. And we are interested in two alternative approaches. One approach makes use of piezoelectro-optomechanical conversion, and the other is direct electro-optic conversion. So the first one involves converting microwave photons to optical photons going through an intermediate mechanical mode. And the second one makes use of the Pockels effect, or second order nonlinearity in optical materials. And the underlying motivation for this is scaling of quantum computers based on superconducting circuits to very large numbers of qubits by networking of computing subsystems.
Okay, thank you very much. And our last speaker today, it's Shankar Selvaraja. I hope they pronounce family names correctly. And he's from Indian Institute of Science. And he did PhD in Belgium. And he has quite extensive work there in the European universities as well. And currently he's working in he's a professor on the Indian Institute of Science, as I told. Shankar, can you introduce your current research?
Yes, thank you very much, Sergey, for the initial words. So, just to give a background, I come from, photonic integrated circuits is what I did for quite a long period of time at IMEC in Belgium, where we're developing next generation optical interconnects using silicon photonics. I've started as unit process development until when I came out, I was doing process integration and device engineering and so on. So I have this two-sided approach. One is on the technology front, where developing fabrication processes to yield some of the photonic devices. On the other side, developing novel waveguide architecture materials for various applications spanning from communication to sensing to now quantum. So right now, my group is primarily looking at different verticals, to exploit photonic ICs. So we have a communication vertical where we are looking at next generation, electro-optic material. It's interesting that Pavel mentioned about pop-up material. So silicon is being used pitched as a key material, but I would say it's a material platform where we are looking at bringing in other electro or ferroelectric materials like barium titanate. So that is something that we are working on. So we have a unique approach in bringing that onto the wafer by using direct deposition technique that is used for electro-optic, and also we have a similar kind of material being explored for quantum as well. We are also looking at gallium nitride and aluminum nitride platform for quantum. And coming back to this particular discussion on optomechanics, we are looking at coupling optical waveguide based system or cavity based system with 2D material or nanomechanical structures for probing purposes. And also we are looking at through our collaborators, coupling between mechanical resonances and optical resonances for memory and quantum transport. So that is something that we are really working on. So that's briefly of interest that is relevant for this discussion today.
Okay, thank you very much, Shankar. And I would like to start from the question: how is important the modern nanofabrication facilities for your research? So optomechanics in principle, this is some science which has been established recently, relatively recently, and nanofabrication techniques has a quite long history, about decades. How often do you use modern nanofabrication in your research? I would like to start from John, since you're the person who came to this area from the atomic physics.
Yeah, well, I'm not the fab person. We have postdocs and staff who do it. I think it's useful, maybe before even thinking of exactly what one does, just to see how far we've come. So if I think of where optomechanics started, the first cavity optomechanics experiment was done in 1983, which was demonstrating optomechanical bistability. And in those days, they used a pendulum with a frequency of 1.5 hertz as the mechanical element. The cavity had a finesse of 15. Input power was measured in watts. And the most critical thing was that because the frequencies were so low, they were very susceptible to seismic noise. And the experimental runs that were successful were few and far between. They had to be run in the middle of the night, and most of the time the experiments didn't work. So what looked like a somewhat straightforward experiment was actually exceedingly difficult in 1983. And nowadays, with the newer technologies, we can manufacture photonic crystals giving us finesse of over 30,000, very low mass, frequencies in the megahertz range instead of 1.5 hertz. And the same phenomena can be easy to see. So I think these are it's the engineering that we get with these very low loss, both mechanical and optical devices that's so exciting. And we have a good nanofab facility at NIST and postdocs who are highly trained to do it. And I do some of the design, but then hand the work off to the others, and they turn out fabulous products that we test.
Thank you very much. Paul, since you're an expert with the fabrications, and actually I know that IBM has absolutely fantastic facilities, and your research focused on the optomechanics and superconductors. How important are these nanofabs for you?
Yeah, well, it's central to our work. the computing systems, the quantum computing systems that IBM is building are based on superconducting circuits on silicon chips. And so that means the sort of devices that I'm interested in, these transducers, will also have to be integrated devices. So devices that are fully integrated on chip. And to do that, one needs to take advantage of all of the advanced techniques that were developed in the semiconductor industry over the last 50 years or so. And it's important to keep in mind that for these devices, precision is very important. And what I mean by that is one might argue that we're not really talking about nanotechnology because the devices are maybe micron size or hundreds of nanometers, but not single-digit nanometers. But that's a little bit deceptive because while the dimensions may be of that size, the precision with which you need to fabricate the device is in the range of single-digit nanometers, particularly for the optical side, for the optical cavities.
Okay, thank you for this comment. That's actually where, when we talk about optomechanics, it can be quite macroscopic. We know this gravitational wave detectors, it's quite big. And all our classical optomechanics, especially which is integrated with superconducting circuits, actually, you're right, it's a micrometer size. But we have a person here who actually works with a nanometer scales and with the signaling molecules. Pavel, how important these nanofabs for your research?
So, as I said, we use optical tweezers to control mechanical motion, and obviously we have this diffraction limit which complicates us manipulating small things. So what we do, we work on so-called auxiliary metasurfaces and metamaterials with the aid to configure near fields. So this is a very well-known example of plasmonic tweezers where you can create localized plasmon resonances and trap small particles and localize them at the nanoscale. So what we do, we design macro scale structures which are, again, they're big on one hand, but they're nanostructured on the other hand. So imagine that you have a functional surface which allow you to trap several things simultaneously and localize the things on nanoscale. Again, using standard diffractive elements, you cannot do this because of the diffraction limit. But if you go to nanostructure, you can gain quite a few other functionalities and introduce other optomechanical degrees of freedom to manipulate small things. So we're users of nano facilities, and we use them to control near fields at the nanoscale.
Okay, thank you. Shankar, nanotechnology. So when you create the nanostructures, what technique do you use? And how important the modern technique for your research?
Yeah, I think at least for our work, these fabrication techniques and platforms are central. I think we can't shy away from that. It is core of whatever we do. But the question that you asked about, what can you do with it and how it is going to help you, right? And I just want to take a simple example of patterning, right? So one of the key, items that you look at in patterning is the resolution that you really want. So how small can you make with pattern fidelity, right? So there are patterning techniques that will offer you. For example, you have electron beam lithography that you can do. And nano imprint that also helps you. But then there is always a question of scalability. I think probably we'll come to that a little later, but this evolution from a simple, optical litho going into electron beam lithography, and now we are also doing ion beam processing as well. So there is a big variety of techniques that is available to us in patterning with their own advantages and disadvantages. So when you are talking about patterning, right, there is one layer, right, where you want to do direct or indirect patterning with right resolution. The other thing is when you reduce the sizes, then the surface area increases, and in some of the applications that we are working on, the surface defects becomes very, very crucial. And more often when you are working at micrometer scale, these defect density is rather low. And when you are talking about highly confined system, then your field strongly interacts with the edges of the walls, right? And that is where the defects are created. And particularly the conventional dry etch process, right? It's a harsh process, and that creates a lot of defects. And now we are moving into a regime where you go from a simple single bulk etch to atomic layer etching, right? Where you're trying to reduce your defect, similar to how we are depositing. So atomic layer etch is another very interesting evolution that people are exploiting now to get defect-free patterning. So as I mentioned, pattern fidelity is one, but then one should make sure that in addition to geometrical requirement or specification, the electrical and chemical surface property becomes very important. And I think we are the new generation of processes, both in lithography and also etching processes, are evolving to address this. I think the things are constantly evolving, but at this point of time, I think we are challenged by the challenge that you have, right? So if you are going to tell me that the current process is not going to yield what I want, then you always go back and rethink, right, why you need this process in first place. So I think my view is the current set of process, particularly in patterning, right, is key. While deposition you can always do, the atomic scale deposition, but patterning now moving towards this atomic scale is very interesting evolution, and I think there is a lot to be exploited there.
Okay, thank you very much. Guilhem, I know that you're working with the plasmonic crystals and photonic crystals. How important for you this nanofabrication, especially that resolution or identity of the structures? Is it how you solve this problem?
Well, I would say that there are many things to say about nanofabrication imperfections in this field, but so regarding photonic crystals, obviously there was already many works in the last 10 or 15 years, especially in particular for what we're interested in today in optomechanics, to enhance the Q factors of the small nanocavities and try to have the best performance as we can. And there is still lots of work to do on that topic, but since that now we are trying to get higher, in particular in what I do in my institute now, to go to higher frequency. We are also facing the problem of disorder regarding the mechanics, the acoustics, because we are also having actually difficulties to obtain the properties that we want for the phononic crystals, because especially when we want to reach some peculiar properties like topological protection, we need to have everything correctly scaled to obtain the proper relation, the dispersion relation in the Venn diagram of our phononic crystal. So disorder and fabrication imperfection are also like at the center of phononics. Like regarding your initial questions about the advance of nanofabrication techniques in optomechanics, I could add that, like as was reminded by John, in the last 10 or 15 years, there was many progresses in really different platforms for optomechanics, from the microdiscs to the 2D, 1D photonic crystals, membrane in the middle configurations, levitated nanoparticles recently. and there are still many things to understand, obviously, on these platforms. But I think that right now, people are also trying to gather different functionalities, and this brings a lot of new challenges in the clean room, because we want to have both the phononic, the optomechanical platform, for example, based on silicon with a 3.5 semiconductor that would be used to add a new functionality, and this complexify a lot the fabrication. So we have to use new techniques. Like in my PhD, I was working with indium phosphide layers, and so we wanted to integrate these layers on the silicon and insulator chip. So we were using BCB bonding to perform this heterogeneous integration. Right now, I'm trying to implement IDTs to electromechanically drive acoustic waves in an optomechanical structure. So we have to use a piezoelectric layer, and adding a piezoelectric layer to a silicon platform changes completely the flow process, the process flow in the clean room, because we don't have the same selections, chemical selections in the etching processes, etc. So yes, the new technological advances in the clean room will help for the development of photonic crystal, but I think it might also help a lot for gathering different functionalities on a chip.
Okay, thank you. I would like to address the second question to Paul. You actually mentioned about very important thing. This is reproducibility. When we talk about the quantumness or quantum behavior of the system, one of the important things is quantum indistinguishability of the system. How are you going to achieve this quantum indistinguishability on your superconductor optomechanical system?
So looking forward in the future of optomechanics and nanofabrication for optomechanics, I think there are two primary developments that will come, or focus areas, and one ancillary, and I'll come to the ancillary one a little bit later. The two focus areas are integration and reproducibility, and Guilhem actually indirectly touched on both of these. So integration means, as John pointed out right from the beginning, tremendous progress has been made in making optomechanic devices and miniaturizing them and getting tremendous performance out of the devices. And now we're coming into an era where we want to combine different functions in one device. So that means integrating within one device different materials and different physical effects. So that means creating an optical cavity, linking that with the acoustics of the system, so some phononic structure, it could be an interdigitated transducer or something like that. And more specifically on your question, Sergey, about linking it to microwave circuits, to superconducting circuits, combining that all together in a way that the different components operate optimally, don't interfere with each other, don't degrade the performance of each other, and also make a connection to the outside world. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then the other aspect that you mentioned, Sergey, is this issue of reproducibility. So you need to, this is the same thing that happened in the semiconductor industry when you make transistors. You make the first transistors, but you want to make eventually billions of transistors on a chip. And the performance of the transistors needs to be reproducible within some margin of error. And that holds also for optomechanics. If you want to build more and more complex systems or scale your production, you need to have reproducibility. But it goes beyond that when you get into the quantum regime, because many quantum applications require devices to be indistinguishable. quantum mechanically indistinguishable, which means that, for example, if two devices need to have exactly the same mechanical frequency, that's really a pretty difficult thing to do. It's hard enough to get it to have the same optical frequency, but to say mechanical frequency is really, really quite challenging. So then I come to this third, ancillary requirement or development that I think will come in the future, and that has to do with this connection to the outside world. I mean, if you're going to do something with an optical signal or an electrical signal, you need to connect to your device, which means you're going to have to package it, right? You're going to, and packaging in the sense that people working in the MEMS industry talk about. So there's a whole field of development that is not really the nanofabrication of the optomechanical device itself, but really how you make it into a robust thing. Say it's some sort of hermetically sealed box, so it's protected from the environment. You get an optical fiber in to get light in and out. You make the electrical connections. That is an often underestimated task and can easily take most of the cost of the device if you want to commercialize it.
Okay, thank you. And Pavel, about your research. So you're trying to combine, let's say, biological systems with electronic chips. How do you see your future? How well it can be done in the future?
It all depends. I mean, we always need to keep in mind system specifications. So at the moment, we do pure research, trying to challenge, I would not say laws of physics, by trying to stretch systems capabilities to the limit. It depends. I mean, I cannot foresee any immediate commercialization of the activities which we do in the field of optical tweezers at the moment.
Okay, and one of the, let's say, fashion or holy grail of the physics for the recent year was a machine learning. And is it applicable for the for optomechanical research?
So we have several projects on that as well. So the one which we use is pattern recognition. So work on optomechanical robots. There are smart structures which we would like to navigate with the aid of optical beams. So at the moment, how it is done, it is called micro machines, by the way. It is done manually. So an operator should recognize the structure and start reconfiguring it. So what we started to do is to use machine learning. So you teach a system to recognize images and reconfigure systems, reconfigure lasers around, and then, I mean, one can achieve a full automatic operation of micro machines. So you can do quite sophisticated operations with the aid of machine learning, which is interfaced with these optical tweezer systems. So this is at least what we are trying to do.
Okay, John, and how machine learning can be implemented in your research?
Well, I certainly think it's part of the future. And in particular, I think one of the most exciting things to see was the development in one of the Stanford groups of devices that were sort of based on the ideas of photonic crystals, but with machine learning genetic algorithms, they ended up looking very little like photonic crystals. In fact, they didn't seem to have much of the long-range order, and yet they still provided the same functionality and maybe even worked better. And I think the most exciting thing I've seen recently was just published this year concerning the highest mechanical quality factor ever seen in a nanomechanical resonator, as far as I know, over 1 billion, and at room temperature, and that was achieved via machine learning techniques. And I think the real one of the key issues that has happened as we've gone from the old days of pendula to photonic crystals in engineerable devices is that you can't calculate things analytically anymore. And that's been true ever since you had the photonic crystals. And when you start to do simulation, things can be somewhat slow, and And in our cases, we have spent a certain amount of time first going through very brute force, what's the word? Anyway, let's say very brute force techniques, and little by little optimizing them. But it's clear that the people who are it's clear that the future lies in machine learning and really learning how to optimize these things to really get the sort of spectacular performance that one just wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And I think that Q in excess of $1 billion really drives that point home.
Some of you already pointed an important direction of the nanotechnology. This is hybrid systems. Usually the people trying to combine superconducting in the semiconductors, biological system with the semiconductors as well. What kind of future you see for the hybrid systems? What can be done? What will be your predictions?
Is this aimed at me again, or
yes,
somebody
yes,
else?
the same to me, and after that we'll follow.
Okay, sure. Well, I think I particularly see a great interest in the hybrid systems in linking quantum systems to sort of natural quantum systems, such as atoms, ions, and arguably somewhat natural, such as quantum dots, to macroscopic fabricated systems, such as mechanical resonators. There are many ways to do that. They can even take places over long distances. And for example, people have cooled, sympathetically cooled mechanical resonators via laser cooled atoms in a vacuum chamber a meter away. And I think that's other perhaps more scalable, useful systems would involve things like Bose-Einstein condensates coupled more directly to mechanical chips. But I think that there will be a great deal of interest in general in the idea of coupling natural quantum systems to fabricated mechanical systems. I think that's got a big future.
Okay, thank you. Shankar, what kind of hybridization or future of the hybridization you can see in your research?
Yeah, I just want to add a few things before, we talk about this hybridization. I just want to intervene, but then I thought I'll wait. So there is a lot, said about the photonic crystal, the evolution of photonic crystals, right? And now we are in a stage where a simple array simulation is not any more relevant. So we have to look at these things more from ML and AI perspective, where John was saying that at the end it doesn't look like a periodic crystal at all. So that much engineering goes in. If you're looking at some periodic structure, then one of the key problem in this fabrication is the problem with the defects, right? And that is something that was also said earlier. So I've seen this grow from large-scale fabrication techniques. So I'm not talking about electron beam litho where you are doing multiple iteration to get what you want, but more from the manufacturing side where the lithography technique, right, for 90 nanometer node or 180 nanometer node is something that yielded very poor crystals, right, on this. And moving towards 22 and beyond, right, where we were using 193 immersion lithography, process, that whole non-uniformity and its defect has improved a lot. So there is a lot that we can take from that. So one is the defect densities could be reduced, the uniformities could be improved by going to this kind of high resolution patterning, and that is a good evolution. But on the other hand, you can actually engineer this by using AI and ML, not just for these crystals, but just to highlight here, one of my colleagues here, he works with these techniques in order to just design a beam. If you want to peak at a certain frequency at a certain Q, you can actually design your, a simple beam based on this technique and where to put the pivot, where to put the electrodes, and so on. So that's my comment on that. But coming back to your hybrid system, right? The things that we are looking at is bringing different materials and different functionalities together. Just to give you an example, we have a simple piezoelectric material that is pretty good, and we would like to bring it and couple it to a photonic structure. So there are two issues there. One is the material that that gives better mechanical properties. You don't want it anywhere close to the optical mode because of the loss associated with this material. So you want to couple the energy, but the physical device, you don't want them too close. So that depends on the material that you choose, and also the wavelength of light that you choose to operate. One way of getting away with this problem is to choose a wavelength where your absorption of your mechanical interesting material, right, is transparent, right? So that is the challenge that I see if you're bringing these materials together. And the other thing is process challenge, and this is something that already brought out. Just to give you an example, you want to put PZT on silicon, just to have some kind of coupling, right? But the moment you bring in silicon, PZT on silicon, right, it works reasonably well if you don't want to under etch and release this silicon. If you want to release silicon, you want to bring in vapor HF or any kind of dry process to remove this. So the exposure to these plasmas can change the mechanical property of this piezoelectric material. So process integration, it's not just the best, you can have the best material, you can have the best device, but then how do you integrate all this? Putting it all together should work as an integrated unit. So I see a lot of scope in developing process integration so that at the end you have all the functionalities together. So in addition to identifying the right material platform and integrating this material platform with the devices, I see integration of processes together to get the final device. An integrated device is equally challenging. So that I think there is a lot of scope to address there.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you're mainly talking about integration of different materials and different structures. But Guilhem actually, in his research, is trying to integrate the different physical phenomena, like plasmonic crystals with a surface acoustic waves and with an optics. How do you see the future of the integration device and integrate?
Well, for me, this is one of the main line of where optomechanics will be studied in the next years. In parallel with the fundamental research that keeps going with, let's say, like fancy types of coupling, etc. There will be, I think, a big study and there is already actually a study of optomechanical system coupled to other functionalities. So these are already discussed before. And as was just said, actually, we are trying to use piezoelectric actuation of acoustic waveguides. And this is extremely hard because we want to stick with nanocrystalline silicon, and adding aluminum nitride on top of this nanocrystalline silicon layers is challenging, because then we want to engineer the silicon a layer with an acoustic shield, so a phononic crystal, and we want to have, if possible, an optical access to use an optomechanical technique of launching phonons in this waveguide. And so when we increase the complexity of these designs necessary, like in consequence, we have really increase of the complexity of the fabrication process flow. So for me, So there are several options. As I said, I was working on 3-5 integration using BCP bonding. This technique is interesting because we have a really good planarity of the bonded layer, and we can really have a combination of different functionalities. So, for example, with indium phosphide, we can exploit the quantum wells for optoelectronic applications. We can also integrate nano lasers and nano amplifiers on those materials, and we can also pattern these structures to obtain the optomechanical structures that we have. I think John has been a bit working on optomechanical lasers in the last years. Yeah, for us, the challenge is to go higher in frequency. And for now, it's mostly a challenge in terms of design and of fabrication of the phononic crystals. We are not yet at the point where the limitation is coming from the IDT's integration, the electromechanical transduction integration, but it might see if we still want to increase in frequency, because for now we are targeting, let's say, around 10 gigahertz, and we have interdigitated transducers that have a width. So we are using aluminum interdigitated electrodes, and they have width of around 200 nanometers. So going higher in frequency will basically mean to decrease these patterns, and this will become a big challenge.
Okay. The most challenging question, for me at least, in my research, is actually to find the commercial applications, especially on the ultra low temperature physics. So how do you see the perspective of the commercial applications of the optomechanical systems? I'm not talking only about sensors, but can you enlarge this vision? How these products or possible products can be commercialized? Guilhem, let's continue with you.
So one line that I think is quite interesting right now, is not the only one, obviously, is the design, the fabrication of optical to radio frequency converters, or radio frequency to optical converters, where we will gather an optomechanical platform that gather, so that with an oscillator performing easily now in 1 to 10 gigahertz range, with an optical access and an electromechanical actuation, which will help stabilizing the phase of this optomechanical oscillator. So optomechanical oscillator in the phonon lasing regime are really useful to have a really well-determined source at high frequency of phonons that, as we know, can transduce quite well in the optics using an optomechanical system. And then we can use, so these oscillators are really phase stable, and we can use different techniques to stabilize these oscillators. So this is something that is studied in different groups, and that might be, to my view, a possible application in the next years.
Paul, you are working at the fundamental research laboratory, but which is run by the commercial organization, IBM, and they was always very good in the commercialization of the research. How do you see the commercial applications of the optomechanics?
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess I should second Guillaume's comment here. I see that that's a very good example, this optomechanical oscillator, and I would say that came out of kind of a fundamental research effort. In fact, we have been part of a EU project called HOT, Hybrid Optomechanical Technologies, and that exact thing was a demonstrator in that project, where the device was fabricated and packaged to demonstrate that it could be commercialized. And in that consortium, we also had companies like ST Microelectronics, which is a major company in sensors and actuators. to get back to your specific question, I think that there are several paths to commercialization here. One is through companies that are active in, the sort of historical MEMS companies like ST Microelectronics and Bosch and so forth that are already using optics combined with mechanics. I think another path is the kind of path that IBM might take at some point. If we can develop a quantum transducer for linking quantum computers or quantum subsystems, that's something that we will need for our own quantum computing systems. And that is perhaps a specialty market, but that is something where the devices will have to be fabricated one way or another. I do think, you sort of dismissed sensors from the beginning, but in your comment, but I actually do think sensors and things like mirror scanners or things like that, that's all stuff that will come first in larger scale commercialization. And just one example in this EU project that we were involved in, there was a group from Copenhagen that made a device that could be used as a detector with optical readout for MRI. So that's a medical application. So you could say that I would classify that as a sensor. But still, that's a clear path to commercialization. And then one last comment is for large-scale commercialization, I think you're talking about room temperature devices, not cryogenic devices.
Yes, that's exactly. So,
and cryogenic devices, that's really going to be for the quantum regime. There's going to be specialty devices, either for research or for this limited, for things like quantum computers.
So when you're talking about cryogenic devices, you're talking about Kelvin or millikelvin temperatures?
You're talking about millikelvin temperatures if you're talking about superconducting qubits.
Okay.
But people are looking at concepts based on other kinds of qubits where maybe you don't have to be at millikelvin, you're talking about single-digit Kelvin temperatures. That's a different implementation of quantum computing. And I've even seen recently a presentation on the idea to go to terahertz frequencies where you could talk about even higher temperatures. It would still be cryogenic, but
of course it will cost significantly lower
than
millikelvin machines. Shankar, so you're from the semiconductor side of the research. How and semiconductor in principle, this is industrial, has a lot of industrial applications. How you can commercialize your research? Is it difficult?
Yeah, so there are two approaches to this, right? I've seen it close. One way is to look at the current ecosystem that these large fabs operate on, right? When you talk about commercialization and large-scale fabrication, then you need to look at, whether the tool set that we have can handle such material and such processes, right? And tune your, material selection and development around it. And the next thing to do is, go for the material, the best material that you want, the best structuring, what you want, and so on. And then look at whether the current tool set can help you to add in. Probably you can augment the current, tool set and add, whatever is required so that you still have the ecosystem around you, right? So these are all two ways of looking at it. One is very restrictive from the thought process, the ideation itself. but the other one, gives you the freedom to think about new things. But at the other end, whether we have, technology to take it, and expand it, right? So there are two constraints here. So most of the work that we do falls in between. Just to give you an example, for a lot of our optomechanical work, we work with material that are already there in the tool set, right? And that gives us easy scaling path, right? And when you're looking at nanomechanical systems with 2D material and so on, that's where the challenge comes. If you are going to bring in, for example, MOS2 or a graphene, we can do it large scale now. So how are we going to handle those in the tool, and how can this be scaled? So the way that we look at is from both sides. If there is a compelling reason to use a certain material in the system, you need to work with the contamination protocols, right, to scale it up, and that really helps you to push the material, or rather to push the technology from just a single device or a single wafer demonstration to something that you can scale. Okay, so that is one important thing that we look at, and the second thing is also on the yield and reproducibility as well. So I make this distinction between a technique and a technology, right? So how do you make a technique become a technology? A good example is the Scotch tape method that people use to transfer graphene that really blown up, and it has created a lot of interesting work, particularly in nanomechanics and so on, which is relevant for this discussion. But now Scotch tape, it's not scalable. You can't do this Scotch tape, but the underlying idea is some mechanical exfoliation that is required. And now we have a reasonably large scale transfer technique that you can employ with that can transfer patterns over large surfaces, right? So you need to look at what is the underlying challenge there, and one can find a new convert this technique into a technology so that it becomes scalable. So I think if you are convinced that the device is of commercial interest, right, then I think we should be able to find a way to change this technique to a technology, or adapt existing technology for that. I think that's the answer. And sometimes you may not have any, right? So it may be so niche that you get it done in your lab, but then the scaling is simply impossible. There are techniques that really died in the lab, right? So it's good for a paper, it makes a lot of noise, but then the moment you say I want to scale it up, there are some fundamental bottlenecks that you're unable to scale it. So I think one need to take a call on whether you want to pursue a particular process. So open-mindedness really helps in those cases.
Okay, thank you. John, how we can contribute to the discussion about commercialization? Honestly, this is the most challenging task for me.
Yeah, okay, well, I've had a few thoughts. So the examples I've seen have been largely youngsters associated with universities doing things like spinning off their PhD work or their postdoc work. And I'll quickly just mention a couple of examples. So one is the company Bandwidth 10, which makes VCSELs with optomechanical output couplers, and that was spun off from work at Berkeley. Another one was spun off from PhD work that Garrett Cole did, and with Marcus Aspelmeyer's group, making crystalline mirrors that he started by making up his own company and eventually sold to Thor Labs. Recently, I've understood that there's a company in the Netherlands called QFox that actually is seemingly commercializing optomechanical microwave to optical transducers using piezoelectric optomechanics. I just learned about this a few days ago.
Fantastic.
And the paradigm that I see is sort of a somewhat different is related to the chip scale atomic clocks that NIST has been working on for at least a decade. And they're really advancing fast as people are now putting complete frequency standards and lasers and even frequency combs on chip. And for the most part, this isn't optomechanical, but we also have an optomechanical accelerometer. At the moment, that's probably not the sort, it's new enough, it's not the sort of thing one would commercialize yet. It uses external lasers and so forth. But if there were the market interest, I think that the pieces are there and people know how to build frequency standards, lasers and so forth on chip, and it would be straightforward to integrate that with the optomechanical accelerometers. Certainly some of the packaging ideas that have already been discussed are very important and come in here. But I think it's the technology's out there and getting better and faster and cheaper. And in that case, it's just a question of, is there the demand? So is there the demand, for example, for a SI traceable optomechanical accelerometer on a chip scale?
So this is actually quite related to the Guilhem comment that it is possible to make receiver and generators on the same chip. So if it's possible to integrate the lasers and optomechanical system on the same chip, it's possible to make the fantastic accelerometers on-chip accelerometers without external laser. Pavel, you're actually working probably on the most commercial side of the science. It's a bioscience. So how it's possible? How do you see the commercialization of your research? Is it possible to implement the optical tweezers into the hospitals?
So there are several approaches how to do commercialization. So we can discuss it a bit. So approach number one is to find a solution for something, and then trying to find a problem which seeks for the solution. It is very good to do it at academia, since you don't have obligations to sell your technology. So another approach is to identify an interesting problem and then starting to look for a solution. And at this point, we don't care much about specific tools. Those can be optomechanical or any other tools which will work. Okay, so in this case, we don't need to write an academic paper. We don't need to write a grant. We need to make this thing working. I have quite a broad experience in commercialization of wireless systems, for example. And in this case, we always start from a demand. So somebody comes and says that we need an antenna, for example, with certain performances, and then we were looking for solutions how to solve this problem. So in biophysics, it is much more complicated, since there are many regulations which we need to meet if we want to work with living objects. It is much more complicated. So on cells level, for example, it is relatively easier, but once we start working with the living organisms, for example, there's a bunch of permits which we need to get. So my lab works on theranostic devices. So what are those? Those are devices which encompass several capabilities of diagnostic and therapy at the same time. So we work on nanocapsules, which we can image in MRI and optics. We can open them and deliver drugs. And with optomechanics, we are just trying, and we actually succeeded to it, another degree of freedom. So we can swim our drugs and put them at certain at certain points of space and do very targeted operation of those nano drugs. So as for commercialization, I think lab on a chip is a quite promising direction to go. And those hospital tests, Sergey, as you said, so say that you have a stream of cells, and you have many of those, and you would like to pick up one of a million which looks suspicious. So how do you do that? And here I think optomechanical tools and machine learning, by the way, which work together, can contribute to this endeavor.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for quite broad and interesting discussion. So I'm going to forward the chairing to the Saba. Hopefully we have questions to our panel. Saba?
Sorry, I think we don't have any questions from the audience, so you can go on with the discussion if you have any.
Okay.
Yeah. You have 25 more minutes. So.
Yeah. In this case, I would like to continue with optomechanics and integration optomechanics and superconductors. So IBM currently working with on this project and implementation of the quantum qubits or to the optomechanics. What is actually the final goal of this project? Are you going to use optomechanics as a sensor for?
Yeah, okay. I mentioned this at the very beginning. Maybe I didn't make it so clear, but the final goal is to be able to network quantum systems. I mean, right now, IBM has announced that it has produced a quantum computer with over 100 qubits, superconducting qubits, and the roadmap that's been announced is we're aiming in the next couple of years to have a machine with over 1,000 qubits. At some point, though, you have to. I mean, and this is all in a dilution refrigerator with many microwave lines in and out of it. At some point, there's a scaling problem. At some point, just the number of connections, the amount of electronics and so forth that you have may not fit in a dilution refrigerator. And so if you want to go to, 100,000 qubits, 1,000,000 qubits, how do you do that? How do you provide a system where the data is and the computation is quantum mechanically secure? So that means that you have to provide the information in a quantum form, and you have to read it out in a quantum form, so that if it is if somebody tries to detect it, that it will be disturbed. To make sometimes that's referred to as blind quantum computing. In order to do that, you need to be able to get the quantum information from this millikelvin environment out into the room temperature environment. And the superconducting qubits, of course, at a room temperature, the decoherence would be essentially instantaneous. And so there aren't actually a whole lot of options to work at room temperature with quantum information. Arguably, having the quantum information in the optical regime is the only viable option. And people have already shown that you can transmit quantum information in the optical regime over hundreds or thousands of kilometers. Yeah, the goal is to be able to create flying qubits that connect things over long distances in the optical regime.
Yeah, but it's quite important and very challenging task to combine optics with superconductors. So for this, you need at least frequency conversion. So you need to convert optical frequencies down to microwaves, which is determined by the material properties of the superconductors. And so as I properly understood, so you're going to use nanomechanics for this conversion.
Yeah, that's one alternative that we're looking at.
Okay. So, and when you talk about the integration of the many qubits, so important part, and now I understand why you raise and highlight this question. This is quantum indistinguishability. And what is actually, when you talk about quantum indistinguishability, what parameters or quantified parameters you can use?
Well, okay, I alluded to that before. I mean, one implementation to connect quantum computing systems is not a deterministic approach, but rather a probabilistic approach where you entangle two systems. And so in that approach, you may have two mechanical oscillators that you entangle that are remotely located. And in order for, there are different architectures. I mean, I would have to go show you a diagram of how this works, but the two mechanical oscillators have to be, whether the optomechanical interaction occurs in one mechanical oscillator or the other, you can't distinguish between the two of them, which means that you need to have the same mechanical frequency for both of them. And that could be very difficult to achieve just by fabrication.
Can you tune it individually?
Well, yeah, there are ideas about how to tune it. Generally, it's difficult to tune the mechanical frequency. And you also need to have depending on the implementation, you may need to have the optical frequencies identical. Now, there are ways to deal with different optical frequencies. You can do something called serodyning to make it look like the optical paths are indistinguishable.
Okay. Shankar, in your message, you pointed about very important thing. This is defects. Can you artificially create defects and control defects artificially? Shankar.
Oh, sorry. I just forgot to unmute. Yeah, certainly you can do that. And this is something that is very exciting as well. On the one hand, we don't want defects, right? We want to take away defects wherever they are.
You cannot avoid them.
Hunt them and then try to see what you can do. You cannot run, away from them, right? It is simply not going to happen. But then the problem is having these defects in places where you want, right? Can you control the defects, right? To some extent, you can in bulk systems at least. But then when you start processing and when you start doing things on the material, then the natural process takes over and it becomes really difficult to do. However, controlling defect generation or controlled defect creation is something that is very exciting, and one can do that through multiple ways. Just to give you an example, you can create controlled defects by irradiating electron beam onto a 2D material. Just to give you an example, if you want a defect in a 2D stack, I mean 2D, it's a pure, there are no surface defects there. You do have edge defects, right? And if you want to really create a defect wherever you want, and you can use those defects for various purposes, and that can be done by controlled irradiation. So that's one way of doing. But then the challenge there is, whether I can physically place it, right? But then the resolution of my defect, right? If I just want to knock off something, just a single atom, then that becomes a resolution issue, right? It is going to create a pool of defects around it. So reducing the defect area strongly depends on the resolution that you can achieve. So that is one way of doing it. The other thing is implanting different atoms. So for example, implanting gallium in something, or implanting silicon. So those kind of implants can also be done. But then again, the challenge here is, how do you control it? I just want a single defect to sit in a physical location that I want. You can actually choose your location, right? But then whether I will have a single defect or a defect crowd is something that is dictated by how well you can control it and the material matrix that you're working with. So if a short answer to your question is, yes, you can create it wherever you want, but then the question is whether you can create those defects within the control limit that you really want to realize the desired function. So that's the challenge we have with the current technique. And right now it's mostly empirical. They just try to reduce your beam current or try to play with all kind of blankers to see where you end up with. But I don't think we have understood enough to say, okay, if this is the energy requirement, this should be the beam size, and this is what your flux is going to be to achieve what you want. So we are not yet there, but there are possibilities to achieve these control defects.
Okay, thank you very much. Saba, do we have questions from the audience?
No, we don't. So I think we can wrap it up now.
Yes. Thank you very much for everyone. So it was a great pleasure for me to talk with you. And thank you for sharing your thoughts, ideas, and very challenging task of your research. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, and
in person.
Thank you very much to all panelists and the chair for this very intense and useful discussion. I think Mark Mudassar would like to announce the future UniKORN events. Mudassar.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and just to reiterate, thank you, Sergey, for chairing, and all the panelists for a really insightful discussion. There's a lot to think about. So this brings us to the end of the year for UniKORN. Thank you for everyone who has been part of that in attendance and in participation. Next year, starting in January from the 17th to the 24th of January, we'll be holding a series of lectures. This will be done by Vittorio Pina on the topic of optomechanical Hamiltonian from a very fundamental level, and then its application to various systems, including moving on to hybrid systems and so on, and how you can tailor that Hamiltonian and what consequences are and how you can calculate that, mainly from a theoretical point of view, but we'll also, of course, look at what the experimental aspects of that naturally is. So posters and information on that will be going out, so please be tuned for that. Keep an eye out on your email to sign up. And of course, it will be online. So until then, I hope everyone has a really good break and a good Christmas and a good Happy New Year. And we'll see you into the next year. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.